They say revenge is best served cold. But in my case, it was served green, with walls of evergreen trees so tall they could block out the sun. It all started with a letter. A thin white envelope from the HOA taped to my door like a scarlet letter of suburban shame. I tore it open, half expecting another reminder about trash bins or mailbox paint. But this one was different. This one hit where it hurt. A $250 fine for unauthorized flower bed expansion. Now, let me make this clear. I wasn't growing a jungle, just a neat, colorful patch of daisies and tulips along the walkway. My wife loved them, the neighbors complimented them, and even the mailman said they made his route brighter. But apparently, one person didn't share that sentiment. Karen. You know the type. HOA president, yard tape measure in one hand, rule book in the other. She'd complained before about my wind chime being too melodic, my Christmas lights being too spirited. But this was personal. When I asked her why the flowers were an issue, she smiled that cold, bureaucratic smile. Because they exceed the approved layout by 12 inches. Rules are rules, she said. 12 inches. The width of her heart, apparently. I paid the fine. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to bide my time. That night, as I stood by my flower beds under the porch light, an idea began to bloom. One that would take root in more ways than she could imagine. If Karen hated a few extra flowers, she was about to despise what came next. I spent the next few weeks studying HOA landscaping guidelines, every comma, every clause, every loophole. And there it was. Nothing, absolutely nothing, against trees or hedges, as long as they were green year-round and well-maintained. Perfect. I called a local nursery, ordered more evergreens than my yard could probably hold, and drew up plans that would make a landscaper cry with joy or confusion. Karen wanted approved landscaping. She was about to get a masterpiece so compliant it would put the neighborhood on the map. And by the time I was done, those 12 illegal inches would grow into a maze she'd never find her way out of. Literally. Because this time, I wasn't just planting flowers, I was planting revenge. By the time the delivery trucks arrived, half the neighborhood had gathered like it was a block party. Flatbeds stacked with tall, perfectly trimmed evergreen shrubs rolled in one after another, their deep green needles shimmering in the morning light. People whispered. Kids pointed. Someone asked if I was starting a Christmas tree farm. Karen showed up last. Of course she did. Clipboard tucked under her arm, sunglasses perched like armor, lips pressed thin with suspicion. She scanned the scene, clearly expecting to catch me mid-violation. Instead, she found invoices, permits, and a landscaper who knew the HOA bylaws better than she did. "I assume this has been approved?" she asked, voice sharp. I smiled and handed her the paperwork. Every plant listed, every placement diagrammed, all fully compliant. She flipped through the pages, her expression tightening with each line she couldn't see. "Hallange. Evergreens are allowed," she muttered. "Year-round green," I replied cheerfully. "Low maintenance, exactly as stated." And that was the moment she realized she had lost control. The planting began immediately. Shrubs went in along the edges first, then curved inward. Not straight lines, curves. Paths. Intentional turns that seemed decorative at first glance but slowly formed something more elaborate. From the street, it looked like tasteful landscaping. From above, It was becoming something else entirely, a maze. Neighbors started stopping by daily, watching the progress like a slow-burning drama series. Some brought coffee, others brought lawn chairs. One retired engineer even suggested improvements to the pathways. The maze grew denser, taller, more complex with every passing day. Karen drove by constantly. Sometimes she says, "Load." Sometimes she stopped, but she never got out of the car. She just stared, eyes darting, trying to decode what I was building and whether it violated a rule she'd missed. It didn't. Every evening, I watered the evergreens carefully, shaping them just enough to suggest walls without crossing into obstruction territory. The paths remained technically accessible, fire code compliant, sightline friendly, bulletproof against complaints. Then came the sign. Nothing flashy, just a small wooden plaque near the entrance that read, Community Greenway Project, HOA approved. That part was technically true. Silence counted as approval, and Karen had been silent for weeks. By the end of the month, the maze stood complete. Tall enough to feel immersive, winding enough to get lost, beautiful enough that people actually wanted to enter. Kids ran through it laughing. Couples strolled inside during evening walks. Even delivery drivers detoured through it just for fun. Karen watched from her porch, arms crossed, fury simmering beneath a forced calm. She'd find me for flowers. I'd given her a forest she could never prune away. Kids ran through it laughing. Couples strolled inside during evening walks. Even delivery drivers detoured through it just for fun. Karen watched from her porch, arms crossed, fury simmering beneath a forced calm. She'd find me for flowers. I'd given her a forest she could never prune away. The first official response arrived in a white envelope, stamped and slid under my door like a warning shot. Inside was a notice labeled Special Review, citing concerns about community impact, increased foot traffic, and the vague but ominous phrase, unintended consequences. No violations listed, no fines attached, just unease, dressed up as authority. Karen had finally regrouped. The HOA scheduled an emergency meeting for the following Thursday. Flyers appeared on doors. Emails went out with subject lines written in all caps. I could almost hear Karen typing them, each keystroke fueled by frustration. The maze, apparently, was now a problem. The meeting room overflowed. Neighbors who had never attended an HOA gathering in years showed up early, some still wearing gardening gloves, others holding printed photos of the maze glowing in sunset light. Karen sat at the front, rigid, flanked by board members who suddenly looked less confident than usual. She spoke first. Of course, she talked about order, about standards, about how one project could inspire chaos if left unchecked. She never said my name, but every sentence pointed straight at me like an accusation wrapped in policy language. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then someone clapped. A woman stood up and said, her kids hadn't played outside like this in years. A retired couple said evening walks had become something they looked forward to again. A delivery driver, apparently invited, mentioned how the maze had become a local landmark on his route. Karen tried to interrupt. She was overruled. I finally stood when invited, carrying a folder identical to the one I'd given Karen weeks earlier. Permits, diagrams, bylaws highlighted and bookmarked. I explained calmly that everything was within, regulations, that no common areas were blocked, that safety standards were met. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I just stated facts. The board whispered among themselves. Someone asked if removing the maze was even legally possible. Another asked who would be responsible for compensating landscaping costs. A third quietly pointed out that community feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Karen's face hardened. This wasn't going how she'd planned. The vote was quick. No action taken. The project would remain. Further reviews postponed indefinitely. The meeting ended in murmurs and relieved laughter. People shook my hand. Someone suggested adding benches. Another mentioned seasonal lighting. Ideas bloomed faster than Karen could shut them down. Outside, under the streetlights, Karen walked past me without a word. Her authority had cracked, not with shouting or rebellion, but with neighbors choosing joy over control. She had tried to fight back. Instead, she'd unified the very community she'd spent years policing. It started with a single post. A neighbor uploaded a photo of the maze just after sunrise, dew clinging to evergreen needles like glass. The caption was simple. Our HOA tried to find this. Now look at it. By lunchtime, the image had been shared dozens of times. By evening, it was everywhere. Messages poured in from people I'd never met. Some lived a few streets away. Others were across the city, even out of state. They all seemed to recognize the story instantly. A small yard, a strict HOA, one person pushing back without breaking rules. The maze became a destination. Cars lined the street on weekends, careful not to block driveways. Families walked in with thermoses and cameras. Couples posed at the entrance. Kids raced through the paths, laughing when they hit dead ends. Someone started calling it the Green Loop. The name stuck. Local bloggers showed up first, snapping photos and asking questions. Then, a community newspaper ran a short feature about the backyard maze that brought a neighborhood together. A radio host mentioned it during a morning segment about creative landscaping. Each mention sent another wave of visitors. Karen noticed. She started appearing more often, clipboard in hand, standing just far enough away to pretend she wasn't watching. I couldn't find the maze, but she could document it. Every smile, every photo, every compliment seemed to irritate her more than any violation notice ever could. The HOA inbox flooded with emails, not complaints, praise. People asked if similar projects could be encouraged. Someone suggested a yearly garden showcase. Another proposed a community planting day. The board, once silent, now had to respond. They announced new guidelines, supporting creative but compliant landscaping. The wording was careful, but the meaning was clear. The tide had turned. One afternoon, a city council member visited with an aide. They walked the maze slowly, listening as I explained how it started, how the fines had pushed me to rethink what a flower bed could be. He nodded, thoughtful, and said something that stuck with me. This isn't just landscaping, it's participation. That night, I stood at the center of the maze, surrounded by tall, living walls I'd grown from frustration. The noise of the street faded. What remained was calm, pride, and the strange realization that a simple act of defiance had become something larger than me. Karen's power had always relied on silence and compliance. The maze broke both. It invited people in. It gave them something to talk about, something to defend. She fined my flowers. I grew a forest people couldn't ignore. The last surprise came quietly, the way real endings often do. No shouting, No letters taped to doors, just a notice buried halfway down an HOA agenda titled Property Management Update. Most people skimmed past it. I didn't. Karen was stepping down. No dramatic explanation followed, only vague language about personal reasons and new opportunities. But the timing said enough. The maze still drew visitors. The emails praising community creativity hadn't slowed. The board had changed its tone, and Karen's influence had thinned to nothing. Control works best when no one questions it. Once questioned, it shrinks fast. A month later, the HOA elected a new compliance officer. He showed up one afternoon, not with a clipboard raised like a shield, but with hands in his pockets. He asked to walk the maze. I agreed. We moved slowly, turning corners, brushing past evergreen walls. He didn't measure anything. He didn't write a single note. At the center, he stopped and smiled. "This is staying," he said. The maze became permanent. Seasonal lights were added in winter. Small plaques appeared, donated by neighbors, each with a short quote about patience, growth, or stubborn hope. A local school asked if their gardening club could help with upkeep. I said yes. The maze no longer belonged to me alone. One evening, I found an envelope tucked into my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single page, a copy of the original fine notice, neatly folded, with one sentence written at the bottom in pen. "Didn't think you'd take it this far." No signature. I didn't need one. I pinned the notice inside my shed, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Rules aren't always wrong. Power isn't always evil. But when authority forgets the people it's meant to serve, creativity becomes resistance. On weekends, I sometimes stand near the entrance and listen. Footsteps on gravel. Leaves brushing jackets. Quiet conversations echoing down green corridors. People don't talk about the HOA anymore. They talk about how calm it feels, how unexpected, how something small changed the whole street. The maze has an exit at the center, not the edge. You walk inward, get a little lost, then suddenly find yourself exactly where you need to be. That feels right. She fined my flower beds to make me smaller. I grew an evergreen maze that made the neighborhood bigger. And every time someone finds their way out, smiling, I know I chose the right response. Enjoying this HOA revenge story, and how a simple fine turned into something unforgettable? Subscribe to the channel for more real, story-driven HOA, and Karen tales that flip the script. If this one made you smile, give it a like, and drop a comment below. Would you walk the maze, or would you have handled the HOA differently?